A fire temple in Zoroastrianism is the place of worship for Zoroastrians, often called dar-e, mehr, or agiyari. In the Zoroastrian religion, fire, together with clean water, are agents of ritual purity. Clean, white ash for the purification ceremonies regarded as the basis of ritual life, which are essentially the rites proper to the tending of a domestic fire. For the temple is that of the hearth fire raised to a new solemnity. For one who sacrifices into fire with fuel in his hand is given happiness. As of 2010, there were 50 fire temples in Mumbai, 100 in the rest of India, and 27 in the rest of the world. History and development. Concept. Main article. Atar, Zoroastrian fire. First evident in the 4th century BCE. The Zoroastrian cult of fire is much younger than Zoroastrianism itself. It appears at approximately the same time as the shrine cult and is roughly contemporaneous with the introduction of Atar as a divinity. There is no allusion to a temple cult of fire in the Avesta proper, nor is there any Old Persian language word for one. Moreover, Boyce suggests that the temple cult of fire was instituted in opposition to the image shrine cults, and that no actual ruins of a fire temple have been identified from before the Parthian period. That the cult of fire was a doctrinal modification and absent from early Zoroastrianism is also evident in the later Atashnayash. In the oldest passages of that liturgy, it is the hearth fire that speaks to all those for whom it cooks the evening and morning meal, which Boyce observes is not consistent with sanctified fire. The temple cult is an even later development. From Herodotus it is known that in the mid-5th century BCE the Zoroastrians worshipped the open sky, ascending mounds to light their fires. Strabo confirms this, noting that in the 6th century, the sanctuary at Zela in Cappadocia was an artificial mound walled in, but open to the sky. By the Hellenic Parthian era, there were, in fact, two places of worship in Zoroastrianism. One, called Bagan or Ayazan, was a sanctuary dedicated to a specific divinity. It was constructed in honor of the patron saint of an individual or family and included an icon, or effigy of the honored. The second, the Atrocian, were the places of burning fire, which became more and more prevalent as the iconoclastic movement gained support. Following the rise of the Sassanid dynasty, the shrines to the Yazatas continued to exist, but with the statues, by law, either abandoned or replaced by fire altars. Also, as Shibman observed, there is no evidence even during the Sassanid era that the fires were categorized according to the sanctity. It seems probable that there were virtually only two, namely the Atash-i Varam and the lesser Atash-i Daran, or fire of fires, a parish fire, as it were, serving a village or town quarter. Apparently, it was only in the Atash-i Varam that fire was kept continuously burning, with the Daran fires being annually relit. While the fires themselves had special names, the structures did not, and it has been suggested that the prosaic nature of the Middle Persian names perhaps reflect a desire on the part of those who fostered the temple cult to keep it as close as possible in character to the age-old cult of the hearth fire, and to discourage elaboration. The Battle of Al-Qadisiyah and the Battle of Nehavand were instrumental to the collapse of the Sassanid Empire and state-sponsored Zoroastrianism, destruction and conversion of some fire temples in Greater Iran followed. The faith was practiced largely by the aristocracy, but large numbers of fire temples did not exist. Some fire temples continued with their original purpose, although many Zoroastrians fled. Legend says that some took fire with them, and it most probably served as a reminder of the faith in an increasingly persecuted community, since fire originating from a temple was not a tenet of the religious practice. Archaeological traces. The oldest remains of what has been identified as a fire temple are those on Mount Karja, near Lake Ham. Ramban insist in. Only traces of the foundation and ground plan survive and have been tentatively dated to the 3rd or 4th century BCE. The temple was rebuilt during the Parthian era and enlarged during Sassanid times. A characteristic feature of the Sassanid fire temple was its domed sanctuary where the fire altar stood. This sanctuary always had square ground plan with a pillar in each corner that then supported the dome. Archaeological remains and literary evidence from Zend commentaries on the Avesta suggest that the sanctuary was surrounded by a passageway on all 4 sides. On a number of sites the gombad, made usually of rubble masonry with courses of stone, is all that survives, and such ruins are popularly called in Fars Kahatak or for Arkis. Quote, ruins of temples of the Sassanid era have been found in various parts of the former empire, mostly in the southwest, but the biggest and most impressive are those of Ardagashnarsp in Media Minor. Many more ruins are popularly identified as the remains of Zoroastrian fire temples even when the purpose is of evidently secular nature, or are the remains of a temple of the shrine cults, or as is the case of a fort-like fire temple and monastery at Surkhani, Azerbaijan, that unambiguously belongs to another religion. The remains of a fire altar, most likely constructed during the proselytizing campaign of Yazdaj II against the Christian Armenians, have been found directly beneath the main altar of the Akhmeids and Cathedral, the mother see of the Armenian Apostolic Church. The remains of a probable fire temple, later converted to a church, have been found within the ruins of the abandoned medieval Armenian city of Ani. Legendary Great Fires. Apart from relatively minor fire temples, 3 were said to derive directly from Ahura Mazda, thus making them the most important in Zoroastrian tradition. These were the Great Fires or Royal Fires of Arda-Burzan Mehr, Arda-Fanbag, and Ardagashnarsp. The legends of the Great Fires are probably of antiquity, for by the 3rd century CE, miracles were said to happen at the sites, and the fires were popularly associated with other legends such as those of the folktale heroes Feridun, Jamshid and Rustam. The Bundarashan, an encyclopedic collection of Zoroastrian cosmogony and cosmology written in book Pahlavi, which was finished in the 11th or 12th century CE, states that the Great Fires had existed since creation and had been brought forth on the back of the ox Rishik to propagate the faith, dispel doubt, and protect all humankind. Other texts observe that the Great Fires were also vehicles of propaganda and symbols of imperial sovereignty. The priests of these respective royal fires are said to have competed with each other to draw pilgrims by promoting the legends and miracles that were purported to have occurred at the respective sites. Each of the 3 is also said to have mirrored social and feudal divisions. The fire witch's fun bag has made its place among the priests. The fire witch's Gashnasp has made its place among the warriors. The fire witch's Burzan Mitro has made its place among agriculturists. These divisions, from an archaeological and sociological point of view, are revealing because they make clear that, since from at least the 1st century BCE onwards, society was divided into 4, not 3, feudal estates. The Farnbag fire was considered the most venerated of the 3 because it was seen as the earthly representative of the Atar Spenishta, holiest fire of Yashna 17.11, and it is described in a Zend commentary on that verse as the one burning in paradise in the presence of Ormats. Although, in the eyes of Iranian Zoroastrian priests, the 3 fires were not really existing temple fires and rather belonged to the mythological realm, several attempts have been made to identify the locations of the Great Fires. In the early 20th century, A.V., Jackson identified the remains at Tak-i-Suleiman, midway between Urumqi and Hamadan, as the Temple of Ardagashnas. The location of the Mithra fire, i.e. that of Burs and Mehr, Jackson identified with reasonable certainty as being near the village of Mehr, halfway between Miandasht and Sabzevar on the Khorasan road to Nishapur. The Indian Bundarshan records the Farnbag fire having been on the glory-having mountain which is in Khwarizm, but later move upon the shining mountain in the district of Kaval, just as it there even now remains. That the temple once stood in Khwarizm is also supported by the Greater Bundarshan and by the texts of Zadsparam. However, according to the Greater Bundarshan, it was moved upon the shining mountain of Kavavand in the Kar district. Dharmestha identified this, celebrated for its sacred fire which has been transported from Khwarizm as reported by Masudi. If this identification is correct, the temple of the Farnbag fire then lay 10 miles southwest of Juin, midway between Jarom and La Udvada at Tash Bayram, according to Parsi legend. When one group of refugees from Khorasan landed in western Gujarat, they had the ash of such a fire with them. This ash, it is said, served as the bed for the fire today at Udvada. This fire temple was not always at Udvada. According to the Kisari Sanjan story of Sanjan, the only existing account of the early years of Zoroastrian refugees in India, and composed at least 6 centuries after their arrival, the immigrants established a Tashwarharan victorious fire at Sanjan. Under threat of war, the fire was moved to the Baro Caves 20 kilometers south of Sanjan, where it stayed for 12 years. Further, it was moved to Bansla, where it stayed for another 14 years before being moved yet again to Navsari, where it would remain until the 18th century. It was then moved to Udvada, where it burns today. Although there are numerous eternally burning Zoroastrian fires today, with the exception of the Fire of Warharan, none of them are more than 250 years old. The legend that the Indian Zoroastrians invented the Afranagan when they moved the fire from Sanjan to the Baro Caves is unsustainable. Greek historians of the Parthian period reported the use of a metal vase-like urn to transport fire. Sassanid coins of the 3rd–4th century CE likewise reveal a fire in a vase-like container identical in design to the present-day Afranagans. The Indian Zoroastrians do, however, export these and other utensils to the co-religionists the world over. Fire temples today. Nomenclature. One of the more common technical terms in use for a Zoroastrian fire temple is dar-e mehr, romanized as dar-e mehr or dialectically slurred as dar-e mehr. The etymology of this term, meaning Mithra's gate or Mithra's court, is problematic. It has been proposed that the term is a throwback to the age of the shrine cults, the name being retained because all major Zoroastrian rituals were solemnized between sunrise and noon, the time of day especially under Mithra's protection. Etymological theories see a derivation from Mithriana or *Mithradana or Mithraean. It is moreover not clear whether the term referred to a consecrated inner sanctum or to the ritual precinct. Among present-day Iranian Zoroastrians, the term dar-e mehr includes the entire ritual precinct. It is significantly more common than the older Atashkada, a classical Persian language term that, together with its Middle Persian predecessors, literally means house of fire. The older terms have the advantage that they are readily understood even by non-Zoroastrian Iranians. In the early 20th century, the Bombay facet Basilis revived the term as the name of the first fire temple, and later in that century the Zoroastrians of Tehran revived it for the name of the principal fire temple. The term dar-e mehr is also common in India, albeit with a slightly different meaning. Until the 17th century, the fire at Udvada was the only continuously burning one on the Indian subcontinent. Each of the other settlements had small building in which rituals were performed, and the fire of which the priests would relight whenever necessary from the embers carried from their own hearth fires. The Parsis called such an unconsecrated building either dar-e mehr or agiyari. The latter is the Gujarati language word for house of fire, and thus a literal translation of atashkada. In recent years, the term dar-e mehr has come to refer to a secondary sacred fire for daily ritual use that is present at the more prestigious fire temples. Overseas, in particular in North America, Zoroastrians use the term dar-e mehr for both temples that have an eternally burning fire as well as for sites where the fire is only kindled occasionally. This is largely due to the financial support of such places by one Arbab Rustam Gif, who preferred the dialectic Iranian form. Classification. Functionally, the fire temples are built to serve the fire within them, and the fire temples are classified according to the grade of fire housed within them. There are three grades of fires: the Atash-daja, Atash-daran, and Atash-bayram. Atash-daja. The Atash-daja is the lowest grade of sacred fire and can be consecrated within the course of a few hours by two priests, who alternatingly recite the 72 verses of the Yashna liturgy. Consecration may occasionally include the recitation of the Vendidat, but this is optional. A layperson may tend the fire when no services are in progress. The term is not necessarily a consecrated fire, and the term is also applied to the hearth fire, or to the oil lamp found in many Zoroastrian homes. Atashadaran. The next highest grade of fire is the Atashadaran, the fire of fires. It requires a gathering of hearth fire from representatives of the four professional groups, from the hearth fire of the Asroni, the Athashtari, the Vastaryoshi, and the Hatokshi. 8 priests are required to consecrate an Adaran fire, and the procedure takes between 2 and 3 weeks. Atash-bayram. The highest grade of fire is the Atash-bayram, fire of victory, and its establishment and consecration is the most elaborate of the three. It involves the gathering of 16 different kinds of fire, that is, fires gathered from 16 different sources, including lightning, fire from cremation pyre, fire from trades where a furnace is operated, and fires from the hearths, as is also the case for the Atashadaran. Each of the 16 fires is then subject to a purification ritual before it joins the others. 32 priests are required for the consecration ceremony, which can take up to a year to complete. A temple that maintains an Adaran or Bayram fire also maintains at least one Daja fire. In contrast to the Adaran and Bayram fires, the Daja fire is the one at which priests then celebrate the rituals of the faith, and which the public addresses to invoke blessings for a specific individual, a family, or an event. Veneration of the greater fires is addressed only to the fire itself, that is, following the consecration of such a fire, only the Atashni ashes, the litany to the fire in Younger Avestan, is ever recited before it. A list of the 9 Atash-bayrams. Aranchar Atash-bayram in Udvada, India, established 1742. Desai Atash-bayram in Navsari, India, established 1765. Dadai's Atash-bayram in Mumbai, India, established 1783. Vakal Atash-bayram in Surat, India, established 1823. Modi Atash-bayram in Surat, India, established 1823. Wadir Atash-bayram in Mumbai, India, established 1830. Banerjee Atash-bayram in Mumbai, India, established 1845. Anjuman Tashbairam in Mumbai, India, established 1897. Yezdi Tashbairam in Yazd, Iran, established 1934. Physical attributes. The outer facade of a Zoroastrian fire temple is almost always intentionally nondescript and free of embellishment. This may reflect ancient tradition that the principal purpose of a fire temple is to house a sacred fire, and not to glorify what is otherwise simply a building. The basic structure of present-day fire temples is always the same. There are no indigenous sources older than the 19th century that describe an Iranian fire temple, and it is possible that the temples that today have features that are originally of Indian origin. On entry one comes into a large space, a hall where congregation or special ceremonies may take place. Off to the side of this the devotee enters an anteroom smaller than the hall she has just passed through. Connected to this anteroom, or enclosed within it, but not visible from the hall, is the innermost sanctum in which the actual fire altar stands. A temple at which a yajna service may be celebrated will always have, attached to it or on the grounds, at least a well or a stream or other source of natural water. This is a critical requirement for the abzor, the culminating rite of the yajna service. Only priests attached to a fire temple may enter the innermost sanctum itself, which is closed on at least one side and has a double-domed roof. The double dome has vents to allow the smoke to escape, but the vents of the outer dome are offset from those of the inner, so preventing debris or rain from entering the inner sanctum. The sanctum is separated from the anteroom by dividers and is slightly raised with respect to the space around it. The wall of the inner sanctum are almost always tiled or of marble, but are otherwise undecorated. There are no lights other than that of the fire itself in the inner sanctum. In Indian Zoroastrian tradition, the temples are often designed such that direct sunlight does not enter the sanctuary. In one corner hangs a bell, which is rung 5 times a day at the boy, literally, scent ceremony, which marks the beginning of each gar, or watch. Tools for maintaining the fire, which is always fed by wood, are simply hung on the wall, or as is sometimes the case, stored in a small room often reachable only through the sanctum. In India and in Indian Zoroastrian communities overseas, non-Zoroastrians are strictly prohibited from entering any space from which one could see the fire. While this is not a doctrinal requirement, it has nonetheless developed as a tradition. It is, however, mentioned in a 16th-century Rivayat epistle. In addition, entry into any part of the facility is sometimes reserved for Zoroastrians only. This then precludes the use of temple hall for public functions. Zoroastrians insist, though, that these restrictions are not meant to offend non-Zoroastrians, and point to similar practices in other religions. Worship. When the adherent enters the antechamber before a fire sanctum, he or she will offer bone-dry sandalwood to the fire. This is in accordance with doctrinal statutes expressed in Vendida 18.26-27, which, in addition to enumerating which fuels are appropriate, also reiterates the injunctions of Yashna 3.1 and Yash 14.55 that describe which fuels are not. In present-day Zoroastrian tradition, the offering is never made directly, but placed in the care of the celebrant priest who, wearing a cloth mask over the nostrils and mouth to prevent pollution from the breath, will then, using a pair of silver tongs, place the offering in the fire. The priest will use a special ladle to proffer the holy ash to the layperson, who in turn daubs it on his or her forehead and eyelids, and may take some home for use after a Gushti ceremony. The Zoroastrian priest does not preach or hold sermons, but rather just tends to the fire. Fire temple attendance is particularly high during seasonal celebrations, and especially for the New Year. Gallery.